All right. So imagine this. What if Google's way of thinking, like how they approach things, ran the entire world?
Hmm.
And I'm not talking about like algorithms taking over, but like their core principles,
Wow.
openness, speed, user focus, constantly innovating,
Yeah.
but applying that to everything like newspapers, entertainment, even like toilet paper.
Wow.
That's the kind of deep dive we're doing today with Jeff Jarvis's book, What Would Google Do?
Right.
And we've got excerpts from his audiobook. And it's fascinating because he basically lays out this blueprint for how businesses need to adapt in this internet age, which is even more relevant now than it was back then.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's fascinating is that Jarvis doesn't just lay out Google's approach like you were saying.
Yeah.
He kind of extracts these almost like core laws of how the internet works.
Yeah.
And then you can apply these laws to like any industry.
Uh-huh.
So for example, one of the laws he says is give the people control and we will use it, don't, and you will lose of us.
Mm.
And it seems kind of obvious, but you have to think about how revolutionary that was back when the book came out.
Yeah, back then companies were so used to controlling the message. Like
Yeah.
they had the power and they weren't really thinking about what the users wanted.
Right.
But Google, they kind of flipped the script.
Totally. And Jarvis really saw that as a sign of things to come.
Yeah.
He saw that the internet was shifting power from institutions to individuals.
Hmm.
And the companies that didn't get that were going to be left behind.
Which leads perfectly to his next law,
Okay.
which is that the internet kills inefficiency.
Yeah.
He uses this to explain why a lot of monopolies and middlemen were starting to struggle.
Right.
Because the internet rewards speed, agility, direct connections. It's like survival of the fittest, but digital edition.
Yeah, exactly. And those who can't evolve get disrupted.
Mm-hmm.
He tells this great story about Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist.
Oh, yeah.
And he was asked, what's your secret to success?
Okay.
And Newmark just said, get out of the way.
Oh.
Like, create a platform that people love and let them use it. Don't overthink it. Don't try to control it. Just get out of the way.
So simple, but so profound.
Yeah.
Because it's like the more you try to cling to the old ways of doing things,
Right.
the harder you're going to fall.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about some of these Google success secrets that Jarvis identifies,
Okay.
besides, not being evil.
Right. Well, one of the biggest ones is this relentless focus on the user.
Yeah.
Sounds obvious, right?
Yeah.
But Jarvis argues that most companies don't truly put the user first.
Hmm.
They're more focused on their own internal processes, their bottom line, or what their competitors are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Google, on the other hand, they're obsessed with understanding what users want and need.
It's like they're constantly asking themselves, how can we make this better for the people who are actually using it?
Exactly. And that leads to another key principle, embracing transparency.
Okay.
So Google, they often develop their products in public.
Really?
They're not afraid to show their work, to get feedback from users early and often.
Hmm.
And it's a stark contrast to the traditional corporate approach of secrecy and control.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're all in this together.
Right.
Let's figure this out.
And that kind of openness can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It builds trust, it fosters collaboration, and ultimately it leads to better products.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
How would these Google-isms shake up different industries?
Let's start with media.
Okay.
So newspapers, as we all know, are in a state of crisis,
Right.
declining readership, shrinking ad revenue, the whole 9 yards.
Hmm.
But Jarvis is surprisingly optimistic.
Oh.
He aptly sees an opportunity for newspapers to reinvent themselves
Okay.
by, you guessed it, adopting the Google playbook.
Okay. All ears. What does that look like?
Well, he says the first step is shedding the burden of printing and distribution.
Yeah.
Atoms are a drag, he says.
I love that quote.
And he's got a point.
Atoms are a drag. It's
Ah.
like he's saying, let go of the old ways, embrace the digital future.
Exactly. And it's not just about putting their content online.
Hmm.
It's about embracing collaboration,
Hmm.
opening up their content to be shared and remixed,
Yeah.
listening to readers, and even letting them assign stories.
Wow.
It's about becoming a platform, a network, a community hub.
So that's a huge shift for a traditionally top-down industry
It is.
where editors decided what was news and readers just consumed it passively.
Yeah, but Jarvis argues that this kind of openness is the only way for newspapers to survive and thrive in the internet age.
Mm-hmm.
He uses Ariana Huffington's Huffington Post as an example.
Okay.
And remember when she was expanding to Chicago and the Chicago Tribune was freaking out?
Oh, yeah. The Tribune saw her as the enemy, trying to steal their readers and ad revenue.
Right, and Jarvis is like, instead of seeing her as the enemy, why not partner with her?
Mm.
Share content, sell ads for her site, join the network instead of fighting it.
That's such a Google move, right?
Exactly.
Collaboration over competition.
Yeah.
Building a bigger pie instead of fighting over crumbs.
No. Exactly. And this idea of collaboration also kind of played out in that whole battle between bloggers and the Associated Press over excerpting stories.
Ah, yes. The AP was trying to cling to that idea that content is king,
Right.
fiercely protecting every word they wrote.
Yeah.
But bloggers saw quoting and linking as a way of adding value and driving traffic back to the original source.
It was a clash of worldviews, the old guard versus the new guard. And Jarvis is firmly siding with the bloggers.
Okay.
He argues that newspapers need to embrace this link economy,
Okay.
where sharing and connecting are the most valuable currency. You need to create unique content, make it searchable, use links to build relationships and drive engagement.
It's all about adding value beyond just the words on the page, right?
Exactly.
It's about becoming part of a larger conversation, a network of ideas and information.
Exactly. And that's what Google does so well.
Yeah.
They don't just provide information. They connect people with information. They create a platform for discovery and exploration.
Okay, so let's shift gears to entertainment.
Okay.
What does a Google-ized Hollywood look like?
Well, Jarvis sees this move away from the blockbuster economy, where studios spend millions of dollars on big-budget movies and then cross their fingers hoping they'll be hits.
Right.
He sees a future where smaller, more niche content flourishes.
Okay.
A world where anyone with a camera and a good idea can create something amazing and find an audience online.
Which is interesting because at the same time, we still crave those larger-than-life personalities.
We do.
And Jarvis talks about Howard Stern as someone who disrupted the old way of doing things long before the internet made it easy.
Yeah, he built his whole empire on his relationship with his fans.
Right.
He was radically honest, he gave his audience control, and he trusted their loyalty. And when he made that really risky move to satellite radio, his fans followed him.
They did.
Why? Because they trusted him.
It's all about building those authentic connections. And you can't fake that people can smell a phony a mile away.
Exactly. And Jarvis points to Kevin Rose and his internet TV network Revision 3
Okay.
as an example of how you can create high-quality content on a shoestring budget by leveraging the power of community and authenticity.
Yeah, their flagship show, Dignation, was literally just two guys on a couch talking tech.
I know.
But they had this massive loyal audience because they were knowledgeable, passionate, and relatable.
Yeah, they understood that people don't just want to be entertained. They want to connect with real people.
And their marketing strategy was brilliant.
It was.
They chopped up their shows into these bite-sized chunks and spread them all over YouTube.
Right.
And used their content as their own ad agency.
And it worked.
It did.
They got sponsors lining up.
Yeah.
Because their viewers actually paid attention to the ads.
Which is unheard of on traditional TV.
Practically unheard of.
Yeah, it's a great example of how the internet has leveled the playing field, enabling anyone with talent and a good idea to reach a global audience.
And that's a key point.
Yeah.
Jarvis argues that the internet has made fame, talent, and audience abundant. It's the post-blockbuster world
Okay.
where anyone can become a star, even if their audience is smaller.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's any less valuable.
Small is the new big, as they say.
Exactly. And that brings us to books.
Okay.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one since you're a podcast host.
Okay.
Jarvis is pretty radical here.
All right.
He says we have to kill books to save them.
Whoa.
He argues that our reverence for the physical book is holding us back from embracing the possibilities of the digital world.
Well, it's interesting that he chose to write a physical book to make that argument.
It is.
But I get his point.
Okay.
Books as we know them are limited.
Yeah.
They can't be easily updated,
Yep.
they're not searchable, and they create a one-way relationship between the author and the reader.
Right. And Jarvis believes that the internet can change all that.
Right.
So imagine books that are constantly updated with the latest information, where readers can comment and contribute, and where authors can directly engage with their audience.
So it's like turning a book into a platform for ongoing conversation and collaboration.
Exactly. And he uses Paulo Coelho as an example.
Okay.
Coelho really embraces the internet to connect with his readers, to get feedback on his work, even collaborate on projects.
Wow.
He even invited fans to create a movie based on his novel, The Witch of Portobello.
Wow. That's really putting the user in user-generated content.
It is. And it shows that even in a world dominated by digital media, there's still a place for books, but they need to evolve.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
But there's one more industry I'm really curious to hear your take on,
Yep.
advertising.
Yeah.
Jarvis has some pretty strong opinions about this one,
He does.
arguing that the best advertising isn't advertising at all.
Yeah, he's actually quite provocative about it. He suggests that marketers aim to eliminate advertising altogether.
Whoa.
Now, before you panic, his point is that a great product and genuine relationships with your customers are the best advertising you can have.
Yeah, I can see that if people love your product, they'll do the marketing for you.
Exactly. But of course, Jarvis acknowledges that advertising will always exist in some form, even in a Googleized world.
Right.
So what does that world look like?
I'm all ears. What's his vision for the future of advertising?
Well, he starts by talking about how Google has already revolutionized advertising with its focus on relevance and performance-based measurement.
Yeah, it's like they figured out how to target the right people with the right message at the right time.
Exactly.
It's not about just blasting your message out to the masses anymore.
Right.
It's about being smart, strategic, and data-driven.
Exactly. But Jarvis argues that traditional ad agencies haven't fully adapted to this new reality.
Mm-hmm.
They're still clinging to the old models of mass marketing and big budget campaigns,
Right.
when the real opportunity lies in building direct relationships with customers.
So how do you do that? What's his advice to marketers who want to thrive in this new world?
So he has this great thought experiment he suggests.
Okay.
Imagine firing your agency and canceling all your ad spending.
Okay.
What would you do instead to build relationships with your customers?
Now, that's a question that would make any marketing executive sweat.
It would. But it forces you to think outside the box.
Yeah.
So Jarvis suggests investing in customer service, creating platforms for feedback,
Okay.
and handing over control of the brand to the people who actually use it.
So instead of trying to control the message,
Yeah.
you give your customers the tools and the platform to become your advocates.
Exactly. It's like turning your customers into your marketing department.
Mm.
And he points to companies like Apple,
Right.
who have built such strong brands that their customers become their most effective marketers.
Yeah.
They've created this cult of loyal followers who are passionate about their products and eager to share their experiences.
It's like they've cracked the code on creating a community around their brand.
They have. And Jarvis argues that any company can achieve this
Yeah.
by focusing on what truly matters,
Okay.
creating a great product and building authentic relationships.
So if I'm hearing you right, the Googleized ad agency is less about creating clever messages and more about facilitating genuine connections.
You got it. It's about building a community,
Yeah.
empowering your customers, and creating a brand that people love and want to be a part of.
Wow, that's a lot to digest.
It is.
And we've only scratched the surface of Jarvis's exploration of how Google's worldview could transform industries.
Right.
Up next, we'll dive into retail, utilities, telecommunications, and even manufacturing.
Get ready for even more surprises.
Yeah.
From open source cars to Google-powered toilets.
Wow.
Jarvis's book will challenge your assumptions about how the world works
Okay.
and inspire you to think differently about the future of business.
All right, I'm ready. Bring it on.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've talked about media, entertainment, advertising now. Let's jump into retail. You know, online shopping is booming, but Jarvis isn't quite ready to write off those brick-and-mortar stores completely.
Not at all.
In fact, he sees a real chance for them to evolve, especially given one of his core laws. The internet kills inefficiency.
Right.
Think about it. Physical stores, they have so much overhead, rent, staff, inventory.
Yeah.
And they're limited by geography. You have to be there in person to experience them. And in that sense, they're inherently less efficient than their online counterparts.
Totally. Jarvis actually used this really interesting example. He brings up Gary Vaynerchuk, that wine entrepreneur,
Oh, yeah.
who built a huge online following.
Yeah.
Not by being some stuffy connoisseur, but
Right.
by being totally passionate and approachable.
Right.
And Vaynerchuk really gets it. He saw the internet as a way to build relationships, not just blast out marketing messages. He created a community around wine, and people loved it.
Yeah.
And Jarvis uses him as an example of someone who understood how to be a platform, you know, giving his audience a place to connect and ultimately helping him sell more wine.
So how does that translate to the average retail store?
Right.
What are some concrete things they could do to become a platform?
Yeah.
I remember Jarvis throwing out a bunch of ideas.
He did imagine walking into your local hardware store,
Okay.
and there's a workshop on building a birdhouse or a forum where people are swapping gardening tips.
Okay.
Instead of just a place to buy stuff, it becomes a community hub.
Almost like a local library or a community center.
Right.
But for screwdrivers and potting soil, I can totally see that.
Totally. And think about all the data that stores collect.
Yeah.
You could use that to offer personalized recommendations,
Mm-hmm.
curated selections based on your interests, even predict what you need before you realize it yourself.
Hmm.
Is what Amazon does online, but on a local level.
It's all about adding value, right?
Yeah.
Going beyond just transactions to create an experience.
Exactly. Plus, local stores have one advantage that online retailers can't beat: immediacy.
Oh, right.
You can walk out with what you need right now.
Yeah.
You combine that with a personalized, community-driven experience,
Yeah.
and suddenly they're a lot more competitive.
Okay, from retail, let's jump to something seemingly unrelated: utilities.
Okay.
This is where I think Jarvis's Google lens gets super interesting.
It does. He focuses on energy, particularly Google.org's RESC initiative,
Okay.
which aimed to make renewable energy cheaper than coal.
Right.
And he compares this to Al Gore's approach, which was much more about taxes and regulations.
So it's a classic example of two very different ways to solve a problem.
Totally.
Gore's coming from a policy angle, whereas Google's like, let's engineer our way out of this mess.
And that's a very Google way of thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Identify a problem and build a solution.
And Jarvis argues that this approach could completely upend the energy industry as we know it. He envisions homes generating their own power energy grids, also being used to distribute internet access, this whole decentralized, interconnected network.
And who's at the center of it all, organizing and connecting the flow of information and energy?
Well, Google, of course.
Google.
No.
He even jokes about Google Power and Light as a hypothetical company.
Which, knowing Google, isn't that far-fetched.
It's not.
But even if they don't become our power company, Jarvis makes a good point that existing utility companies could learn a lot from their approach.
Yeah.
It's all about being open, being innovative, and putting the user, in this case the energy consumer, at the heart of everything you do.
Right.
Which brings us to another industry that's ripe for a Google-style makeover: telecommunications.
Oh, yeah. Remember that time Google almost bought a phone company?
Oh, yeah.
Larry Page was practically giddy at the thought of all the possibilities.
It makes total sense.
It does.
Google thrives on openness connectivity, giving users control. The telecom industry, let's be honest, has been notorious for doing the opposite.
Right.
Locking people into contracts, limiting what they can do, and providing customer service. That's the stuff of nightmares.
I know Jarvis basically wants to hand our cable and phone companies over to Google and say, fix this.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where everything's open, transparent, affordable. We can create and share, freely access the internet from any device and never have to wait on hold with customer service again.
It's a beautiful dream.
It is.
But even if that doesn't happen, he outlines what a Google telephone and telegraph company would look like.
Yeah.
It's a platform for creation and connection, totally open and transparent, and puts the customer front and center.
He even suggests using Google's own tools to hold them accountable.
Okay.
Imagine a Google map where you can report service outages, or a YouTube channel dedicated to sharing telecom horror stories.
Oh, that would be amazing.
They would have to shape up pretty quickly if that happened.
They would, and Google would be there helping us organize and amplify those voices. Okay, let's shift gears again to manufacturing, where Jarvis focuses on cars notoriously complex and resistant to change.
Yeah, this is where I thought he went a little too far. He proposes the idea of an open source car.
Yeah, like car companies opening up their designs and letting anyone contribute. It sounds a bit unrealistic.
It does sound radical, but hear him out.
Okay.
What if you could customize your car from the ground up? Choose the engine design, the interior, add features you actually want. It's like building your own computer, but for your car.
Okay, I can see the appeal of that, but could car companies really handle that level of customization?
Jarvis thinks so.
Okay.
He argues they could tap into this huge network of designers, engineers, and car enthusiasts to come up with fresh ideas. Plus, they could cut development costs by sharing resources and collaborating.
Okay.
And they'd create a much more engaged customer base if people feel like they have a stake in the process.
It's like crowdsourcing a car.
Exactly. And he even envisions moving beyond traditional ownership models.
Oh, okay.
Like Zipcar, where you pay a fee and have access to a whole fleet of cars.
Right.
Or a subscription service where you can swap cars depending on your needs. A minivan for a family trip, a sporty convertible for a weekend getaway.
It becomes less about owning a thing and more about accessing a service, which aligns perfectly with Google's philosophy.
Right. It's all about giving users choices and connecting them with what they need. It's like Google Maps for transportation. You tell the system where you want to go, and it finds the best options for you.
Okay, he admits this is a long shot.
Yeah.
Getting car companies to embrace open source is a tough sell.
It is.
But he points to companies like Tesla who are already shaking things up.
Yeah.
They're built on innovation technology and a user focus that's very Google-like.
Yeah, the old guard needs to adapt or risk getting disrupted.
Speaking of disruption, Jarvis argues that even everyday consumer products could get the Google treatment
Okay.
from Coca-Cola to, believe it or not, toilet paper.
Toilet paper, how do you Googleize that?
Right, wait, toilet paper. How do you Googleize that?
Well, he uses Coke as an example,
Okay.
suggesting they could let users create their own personalized versions.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine going online, picking your flavor combos, and having your custom batch of Coke delivered.
That's wild. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. It's mass customization, which plays right into Google's strength data personalization, user-generated content.
Totally. He also talks about how platforms like Etsy empower small businesses to sell unique handmade goods,
Right.
tapping into the desire for personalized, authentic products.
Mm-hmm.
It's the new big phenomenon we've seen across industries.
Yeah.
The internet lets niche products and communities flourish, challenging those mass-produced, one-size-fits-all goods.
So it's like the craft beer movement.
Yeah,
But for everything. I get it.
for everything. And then to really drive home this point about how this applies to anything, he brings up toilet paper,
Okay.
specifically Toto, a Japanese company making high-tech toilets with all the bells and whistles.
Wait, are we talking about toilets with heated seats and built-in bidets?
Exactly.
I've seen those videos online. It's like a spa experience for your backside.
The Toto washlet. It's a perfect example of how Google's principles, user-focused innovation data, can be applied to anything, even something as seemingly low-tech as a toilet.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Okay, we've covered a lot, but there's one more area Jarvis explores that I'm curious about, the service industry specifically. He talks about airlines, which have a reputation for, well, not exactly being customer-centric.
Just putting it mildly. They overbook flights, charge for everything, treat passengers like cattle.
Huh.
I don't know how even Google could fix that mess.
Yeah, it seems like an impossible task, but Jarvis thinks it's doable.
Okay.
He believes even airlines can embrace those core principles of openness, transparency, and user focus.
So the key, he says, is for airlines to stop seeing themselves as just transportation providers and start thinking like service companies that genuinely care about the customer experience.
Now, that's a pretty drastic change for an industry that's built on squeezing every penny out of passengers as possible.
It is, but Jarvis argues it's the only way to survive long term. He points out that airlines already gather tons of data about passengers.
Yeah.
They could use that to personalize the travel experience, anticipate needs, make flying less of a hassle.
Imagine an airline that knows your favorite seat, your dietary restrictions, your entertainment preferences, and just takes care of it without you having to ask.
Like having a personal concierge for your flight.
Yeah.
And imagine if they were upfront about delays, cancellations, other disruptions. Instead of keeping passengers in the dark, they could proactively provide updates, offer alternatives, even compensate for the inconvenience.
That would be a game changer.
It would.
No more waiting at the gate for hours wondering what's going on.
Right. Jarvis even suggests airlines could embrace user-generated content to improve. Encourage passengers to share their experiences, give feedback, offer suggestions.
So use the power of the crowd to make flying better for everyone.
Exactly. It's a bold idea.
It is. And what's fascinating is that Jarvis starts this section of the book ready to give up on airlines. But he ends up offering this pretty compelling vision for how they could change.
Yeah, it all comes back to those core Google principles, doesn't it?
Right.
Openness, transparency, user focus, relentless innovation.
He argues that any company, even one as seemingly stuck in its ways as an airline, can adapt and thrive if they embrace these ideas.
It's an inspiring message, isn't it?
It is.
That even in a world where things feel so messed up, there's hope for change.
There is, and it starts with thinking differently, challenging assumptions, and asking that key question, what would Google do? It's pretty amazing how Jarvis can take like this one company, Google, and use it as this lens to examine pretty much every industry imaginable.
Right. From toilet paper to transportation, he finds these ways to apply those core principles,
Yeah.
openness, speed, user focus, and constant innovation.
It's super thought-provoking.
It is.
Because it makes you realize that it's not really about Google itself. It's more about like a mindset, a way of thinking.
Right?
That you can kind of apply to any business, any problem.
And it highlights how the internet has fundamentally changed the rules of the game.
Yeah.
Like the old ways, they just don't work anymore.
So for those of us who aren't like running Google or some huge corporation,
Right.
how do we actually apply these ideas to our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, and I think that's the real power of Jarvis's book.
Yeah.
It's like a call to action.
Okay.
It's not enough to just understand these principles. We need to actually find ways to put them into practice.
So where do we start? What's the first step?
I think it begins with awareness.
Okay.
Like, pay attention to the companies that are getting it right and the ones that are struggling.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, why are some businesses seeming to effortlessly adapt while others are falling behind?
And once we have that awareness, how do we actually translate that into action?
That's where Jarvis's central question comes in.
Right.
What would Google do? So how would they approach this problem? How would they design this product? How would they interact with their customers?
So it's like this mental exercise.
That's exactly.
A way to challenge our own assumptions and open ourselves up to new possibilities.
Totally. And it's about embracing those principles of openness, speed, user focus, and innovation in everything we do.
Okay.
Whether we're launching a new project, leading a team, or just navigating our daily lives.
It's about being adaptable, responsive, connected.
Right.
It's about being human in this increasingly digital world.
I love that.
Yeah.
Being human in a digital world, it really captures the essence of it.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into Jarvis's work,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you hope listeners take away from it?
I hope they walk away feeling both inspired and empowered.
Okay.
Inspired by the incredible potential that the internet has unlocked, and empowered to actually embrace those possibilities and make their own mark on the world.
That's a great takeaway. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we sign off?
Jarvis leaves us with this really powerful challenge.
Right.
He asks how we can apply these principles to our own lives and work. So how can we embrace openness, speed, and user focus to achieve our goals and have a greater impact?
It's definitely something to think about.
It is. I encourage everyone listening to reflect on that question. And if you have any aha moments or insights, we'd love to hear them.
Okay.
So share your thoughts with us on social media, and let's keep this conversation going.
That's a great idea. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into what would Google do. It's been a fascinating exploration of how one company's philosophy can really reshape our world.
It has been. And remember, as we navigate this ever-evolving digital landscape,
Right.
don't be evil,